You gotta have standards in the workplace. If you don't, all hell will break loose and no one wants that. We're just letting the idiots run wild, and when that happens, sadness reigns supreme. Just think of some of the nonsense that happens even with these standards. The human race is very good at going crazy without realizing it. When it comes to wrestling though, you never know what could happen no matter what you do. Some acts have been punished in truly bizarre fashions, even though if they had happened outside of this bubble, no one would have cared. Sometimes literally. Even facial movements can be enough to put you in the doghouse forever, and go and explain that one. When such things go down, however, there is only one thing to do, and that's expose such madness for all to remember, and then of course, leave comments. Because we all love comments. It's 2018, and we're on YouTube. I'm Simon from WhatCulture, and this is 10 WWE punishments that didn't fit the crime.
But before we begin, I want to talk to you about today's sponsors, Dollar Shave Club. They stock stuff that even I, a person who can't grow a beard, can use. It goes way beyond razors. Check it out. Shave butter, body wash, my personal favourites, the wet wipes that smell like heaven, and the durable rubber-gripped razor handle with 6 blades per head that make for such a smooth shave. So, let's test it on The Office.
No.
Don't worry, boys. Daddy's picking up this check.
How am I supposed to...
Cleanse me!
So there you have it. How are you feeling, Jules?
I'm feeling sleek, I'm feeling sharp, I'm feeling ready for content.
That is a coincidence, because there is a list up next.
It's almost like we planned it.
If you like the results, then Dollar Shave Club is offering their Daily Essential Starter Set to new members for only $5 if you go to dollarshaveClub.com/whatculture.
Number 10, being fired for smiling. Yeah, you heard that right. The next time you go to smile, which is sometimes involuntary, remember that in WWE this could see you lose your job. And what a roller coaster that would be. You'd soon be crying after that. The true definition of ups and downs. Someone that knows this better than most is Paul London, who found out the hard way in June 2007. During a backstage segment on Raw, the young high flyer was one of several wrestlers tasked with standing in a corridor as Vince McMahon walked to his limousine that was about to explode. You'll remember that. While he nailed the standing part, he failed to convey the appropriate level of seriousness by grinning while the camera was on him. According to reports, when Vince watched the segment back after the show went off the air, he was absolutely livid, so much so that London, once a promising up-and-comer, was booted out of the company altogether about a year later. Seems a bit harsh, right? Because it was. Fired for being a happy person, even if your boss was about to blow up. McMahon could have just had a word in his ear, mentioned what he had done. Instead, London was buried for a while, and then yes, let go. Don't smile. Ever. Number 9, beaten up for scouting the competition. Admittedly, Robbie McAllister of the Highlanders going to the Impact Zone was not the smartest thing to do. He probably would have got himself in less trouble spending his day off at a meth lab. Maybe not with the police, but I bet WWE would have appreciated it more than this. On the flip side, many of us at the time were left questioning what exactly TNA thought they were accomplishing by putting their cameras on him and referring to him by his real name live on air. It wasn't the nicest move, even though they were only drawing a page from the playbook of Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff, who routinely did such stuff during the Attitude Era. Regardless, McAllister appeared to be punished once his employers caught wind, as on Raw a couple of weeks later, he was put in a particularly stiff match with one JBL. The idea of wrestling being a work seemed forgotten about. Whether Bradshaw was instructed to play rough or he just took it upon himself to teach his rookie co-worker a lesson is difficult to say for certain, and it probably made no odds to McAllister either way. But again, after this happened, the Highlanders never did much and eventually vanished from TV. All because one of them took his kid to a wrestling show while on holiday. Number 8, yelled at for saying title shot instead of title match. Vince McMahon seems to have a thing for certain words or phrases. He doesn't like belt when talking about a championship, and you don't go to hospital. You go to a medical facility, which sounds like something out of Resident Evil. Braun Strowman reportedly found himself on the wrong side of Vince McMahon last year for forgetting this as he went to the ring to demand a title shot, apparently ignoring instructions to refer to it as a title match. And once again, yes, you heard that correctly. What the difference is, I don't know, other than maybe the word shot has negative connotations, but I cannot believe anyone in their right mind would pick up on that. If one moron claimed Strowman was threatening gun use, well, they'd actually be potty. Either way, Strowman returned backstage afterwards and got a right old ear bashing from the chairman of the board in front of the rest of the locker room. As punishments go, you may not think that sounds particularly severe, but once again, what was Strowman actually guilty of here? He essentially just said the wrong word, and it wasn't like he swore or suddenly went all out racist. Also, the only person that cared was Vince. Truth. Number 7, let go for upsetting sponsors. Despite being perhaps the greatest play-by-play commentator WWE has ever had, Jim Ross's position within the company never felt entirely secure. He was never more than one ill-judged remark from getting his marching orders. So this proved in August 2013 when the former voice of Monday Night Raw hosted a special WWE 2K14 event at which the game's roster would be revealed and then discussed by a panel of legends, including Ric Flair. At the time, Ross, along with the Nature Boy, was accused by some for performing his duties intoxicated, the evidence for this coming from the fact they shared a couple of off-color stories. JR has since denied this, claiming that his quote-unquote drunken appearance was in fact due to his Bell's palsy, and that the real reason he was fired is because of pressure from the sponsors, who were disapproving of the tone of their conversation. If so, this all seems rather unfair, and I stand by that, because I was actually present for this very event. Everyone on the night seemed to love it when it was all said and done, because it was very entertaining, and a few days later we learned about all this fallout. It made no sense then, and it makes even less sense now. What was a very fun occasion soon became a disappointing one, but I guess that's the breaks. Number 6, banned from the locker room for eating. Dropping a few crumbs while you eat lunch isn't the end of the world, although if you do, you should at least have the common courtesy to scoop them up afterwards instead of just leaving them lying around. There's some nice tips for you there, should you not be aware of how to ingest food. The Miz could have done with this advice about a decade ago. According to reports, the reality star had been given some fried chicken in the locker room when he accidentally got some grease in a co-worker's gym bag. This enraged one Chris Benoit so much that Miz was dragged off to wrestlers' court, where the jury ruled that he would now have to get changed in public restrooms for the next year. While this punishment clearly had no long-term effect on Miz's WWE career, it does seem a bit much just because a crumb fell out of his mouth. Couldn't they have just said, please clean yourself up in the future? Gotta give it to the Miz though, that would have broken most people, and instead he toughed it out and today is an essential member of the roster. Pretty amazing if you ask me, he earned all our respect. Number 5, a huge bar tab for being ribbed. Muhammad Hassan once told Eddie Guerrero to stop using the camel clutch because that was his finisher and he wanted to protect it. Now this was bad because 1, Eddie was a respected veteran at the time and Hassan wasn't, and 2, the Guerrero family had basically invented that move years prior. Unsurprisingly, Eddie wasn't happy with all this, but that's why it needs context. According to Hassan, he only did this after Kurt Angle had said Guerrero would be impressed by his moxie and that it would win him favor with one of the most important guys in the locker room. Fortunately, as said, Latino Heat was not impressed. He reportedly got his co-workers together for a round of wrestlers' court where it was decided Hassan would have to pick up a $2,000 bar tab by way of punishment. It hardly needs to be said, but there is no way he would have got such a harsh sanction if his name was The Undertaker or Shawn Michaels. It was a practical joke that went very wrong, and one guy ended paying way too much, both literally and figuratively. Number 4, buried for breaking the dress code. As far as I know, WWE doesn't really have what you might call a formal dress code. The wrestlers genuinely have to look presentable at the annual Hall of Fame ceremony, but aside from that, you're pretty much free to wear whatever you want, which makes sense, given you're on the road for about 68,876 days a year. At least that seems to be the case, but every now and then you have to wear a suit and tie, and if you don't, you might find yourself on the wrong side of veterans. This is not good. Legend tells us that this is what happened to CM Punk in 2009 when he was said to have angered The Undertaker by dressing in a way that was unbecoming of the World Heavyweight Champion. When the straight-edge superstar refused to fall in line, his punishment effectively amounted to being stripped of the title at Hell in a Cell, where he was comprehensively buried by the dead man in about 10 minutes. Now I don't know how Punk responded to this or what he said, but going through all that for not dressing a certain way is interesting to say the least. Number 3, being made to cry because of your attitude. If eating chicken backstage is a faux pas, then imagine how much locker room trouble you can land yourself in by having what is seen as an egotistical heel persona. The answer is a lot of trouble. Shawn Michaels may have got away with it in the 90s, but Melina wasn't so lucky a decade later. In fact, the former women's champ apparently annoyed her co-workers so much with her diva attitude that they came up with what can only be described as a rather cruel plan to try and balance everything else. Apparently, Paul London and Brian Kendrick made a wager about how quickly they could make her cry before berating her with a barrage of apparently quite nasty insults. Whichever way you spin it, that's out of line. One would seriously hope that instances like this are a thing of the past in today's era, because it's like your mum said, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Number 2, fine for blading. This one makes more sense than a lot of others on this list, to be fair. When the PG era came in, WWE stopped anyone cutting their own foreheads open for obvious reasons. Doing that is not PG. Given that Batista kinda dances to the beat of his own drum though, he didn't want to listen to this. So back in 2008, the Animal intentionally cut himself during a steel cage match against Chris Jericho, becoming one of the first wrestlers to bleed after the introduction of the more family-friendly direction WWE was headed in. Since this flew in the face of the rules, Batista was punished with the full force of Vince McMahon. He was hit with a massive $100,000 fine in an apparent attempt by the chairman to send a message to the rest of the locker room. You can understand why they took such a dim view of the incident, to be fair, but $100,000? Even for someone that was probably on a huge salary, that seems rather excessive. A tenth of that would have got the point across, but hey, as we've established, don't cross the boss. Number 1, suspended for horseplay. It's difficult to even think of an appropriate header for this example, as it's still not entirely clear what Titus O'Neil was supposed to have done to earn himself a 60-day suspension back in 2016. Essentially, the story here is that Vince McMahon was walking backstage as Monday Night Raw went off the air, having just finished honouring the newly retired Daniel Bryan when he was stopped in his tracks by O'Neil. The duo then shared a rather awkward tussle, and that was basically it. Looked a bit strange, granted, but it wasn't the same as the Paul London incident, since the occasion didn't demand stern expressions. They're supposed to be celebrating a great career. Quite why the chairman decided to come down on Titus like a ton of bricks is anyone's guess, although he at least seems to be back in the good books now. According to reports, Vince absolutely loved O'Neil's trip at the Greatest Royal Rumble in April, which, if anything, was probably a little bit worse than this. But that's wrestling, my friends. That's wrestling.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe below, and if you're looking for more content like this, then try a few things that are floating about around my ears. It might be fun. I can't promise it though, but it might be.